the floods. And Lisa's daughter lives in Leander, and she fostered the dog for a couple weeks, and then just you can't give him back once you do that. So, yeah, no cats. But she's a big dog, and she thinks she's a lap dog, which is kind of scary. So I'm still talking here. Checky 1, 2. Hello, hello.
Oh, yeah, so that is the stream, but if you get a few seconds, you'll see it switch.
Check 1, 2. Check 1, 2.
You should be correct.
Am I done?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm here to come back.
Okay.
And that's probably just our house. Yeah. We're live.
Great.
Jennifer can run us.
Yeah.
We're live. Don't touch the computer. I need to just to make sure it doesn't go to sleep. That's all I'll do. No, I gotta say, since it's live stream, yeah, it may see that it's working. But this one was like 4 hours. So I'm not too worried about it. So we go with 6. I don't know why I was thinking 5:30. Either way, I think maybe. Well, yeah, I've got 2 of these, so this is we weren't sure we were gonna leave. Really, that's one bit of that spirit up there. I can only be through this event and there. So, yeah, with advisory board. I have my laptop on it. On right to and connected to the switcher. And then I have see what I like multiple smarter to split it up. And my computer is out before it gets the switcher has been put. Plus it goes down to a TV in front of the video meter. And then I have a second computer. Split it. And then the output of that's one monitor right there. I have one more projector. And then Johnson back out and
Good to see you, Dr. Burns. Yes, sir. We have a seat for you. Great to see you. Yes, sir. You're going to switch right over here. Yes, sir. You're right.
It's true. Howdy! I love how that works. My name is Maria Escobar-Lemon, and I have the privilege and pleasure of serving as the Executive Associate Dean at the Bush School of Government and Public Service. I want to thank everyone for coming tonight. Welcome to all of you here. Welcome to those who are joining us online. We're so glad to have both our in-person and online attendees join us for this important discussion. Welcome to the United States-Mexico Relations in a Changing World discussion, which is part of the Other Side of the Border, the Ties That Bind and Issues That Divide speaker series, featuring practitioners working on border, Mexico, and Latin America. Before we get started and I introduce some of the people you're going to hear from tonight, I want to take a quick moment and give a shout out and a special warm Aggie welcome to a couple special people who are here this evening. They include Mr. James Edge, council member and mayor pro tem for the city of Bryan, chairman of our very own Bush Advisory Board, Mr. Neil Bush, Other Bush School advisory members, I saw Mr. Royce Hickman earlier, thank you. Mr. John Adams, Mr. Arno and Ms. Barbara Krebs, as well as a special welcome to Ms. Abby Spencer-Moffett, who is joining us online. Additionally, we have the pleasure of being joined by a number of former Mosbacher Commerce Department staff and others who served in President Bush's administration joining us online. Thank you so much for taking time tonight to engage with us. Tonight, we're going to hear from a couple of esteemed Latin American experts. The first being our very own Bush School Assistant Professor, Aileen Teague, who is the series organizer in collaboration with the Mosbacher Institute's Borders and Migration Program, which strives to promote evidence-driven research and public policy on migration and economic border flows. Dr. Teague joined the Bush School's Department of International Affairs as an assistant professor in the fall of 2020. She previously held a postdoctoral fellowship at Brown University's Watson Institute for International and Public Affairs. She earned her PhD in history from Vanderbilt University in 2018. And with a fun fact I learned, she was born in Colón, Panama, and traveled the world as part of a military family, and then herself went on to give distinguished service to our country as a member of the United States Marine Corps from 2006 to 2014. We are privileged to have her teaching classes on American history and U.S. relations with Mexico and Latin America. Her most recent book is Policing on Drugs, the United States, Mexico, and the Origins of the Modern Drug War, 1969 to 2000. With that, thank you so much, Aileen. I'd like to invite you to the stage to introduce your distinguished conversation partner for the evening.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Maria. And thank you to all of you for joining us tonight, both our graduate and undergraduate students, the Bush School community, and our faculty members. And an additional welcome to those who are tuning in on Zoom tonight. We really appreciate your support. Before I jump into introduce our guest, Ambassador Garza, I want to express my gratitude to the Mosbacher Institute, especially to Miss Ann Lockett and Miss Jennifer Moore for doing all of the legwork to organize this event. These always turn out beautifully, and I'm very grateful to be a part of this speaker series and the organization of it. So with that said, I want to introduce Ambassador Antonio Garza, who served as U.S. Ambassador to Mexico from 2002 through 2009. Prior to assuming that responsibility, he was chairman of the Texas Railroad Commission, a statewide office to which he was elected in 1998. Mr. Garza was formerly a partner at Bracewell and Patterson, now Bracewell, and served as Secretary of State of Texas and Senior Policy Advisor to the Governor of the state of Texas from 1994 to 1997, and as Cameron County Judge from 1988 to 1994. Among his many experiences working in public policy and the corporate sector, Mr. Garza is a member of the Board of Trustees of Southern Methodist University, director to the George W. Bush Foundation, and chairman of the Bush Presidential Center's Advisory Council. He is part of the University of Texas Development Board and is a past chairman and president of the Texas X's, the Alumni Association of the University of Texas at Austin. Additionally, the ambassador is director to the Texas Tribune, America's Society or Council of the Americas, American Chamber of Commerce in Mexico City, and is a member of the Council on Foreign Relations and COMEXI, the Council on Foreign Relations Mexican counterpart. Additionally, Mr. Garza is a recipient of the Aguila Azteca or Aztec Eagle, the Mexican government's highest honor bestowed upon a foreign national. Currently, he serves as senior advisor to the Mexico City office of White and Case LLP, one of the world's leading global law firms, and is chairman of Vianvanto Ventures, a management consultancy with a focus on US-Mexico cross-border business development. So there's a lot of things. This is a... With that said, I'll cut the bio short and we'll welcome the conversation with Ambassador Tony Garza.
Yeah. Thank you. All right.
All right. So with that intro
Thank you.
behind us, it's great. I mean, I feel like one of the best formats here and one of my favorite type of forum to engage with our guest speakers is this sort of open conversation type format. And I think that there's no better place to start than with public service, which is something we both care deeply about. And I mean, I served in the military and I work in an academic community where many in the audience also highly value public service, especially in the spirit of President George H.W. Bush's legacy. And just to kind of get the conversation going, could you share a bit about your connection to President Bush and tell us about the path that eventually led you to serve as U.S. Ambassador to Mexico for 7 years?
Yeah. First of all, it's really a tremendous honor to be here. And I look around and I see some family and some friends, and it's a little intimidating. I've not done this sort of thing in a bit. But I go to the president, the third president, has made an impact on this country. But for their role in my life, I probably would not be sitting here. At a lunch for students, and he public officers. He says, "Is there anything I left out?" And I said, "One of the things that you left out was volunteer activities that I was engaging in before I ever entered public office. I've been a volunteer coach, in varsity basketball, soccer, indigent and migrant health center, big brothers, big sisters, and that to me was service. I used to characterize it as a vocation. When I walked through the school here the first time, characterization as a noble calling. I like that. That was very much the president. So I could say that I don't remember a time in my public life, sticker on my notebook in 1980 at the University of Texas. So very much a part of my life. I will also say that those activities that I was involved in as a volunteer, the coach, as a Republican in Texas, that particularly wasn't something with public service in the sense that the county needed. One should bring to public life. Little did I know from God, if you will. No to make some good congratulations. Months later, George
start of a life in the public arena. It feels very good to be here. I think the patients. And you're back. 40 years of the election. But it feels very much like I was all because I think I'm trying to embrace the values. H.W. Bush and that was hard. It really was. I mean, it's a really good place to work with.
Sure. Well, one of the reasons why other
Looks great there.
people to share some of your thoughts, especially professional experience and for now living in Mexico, also serving as back in Mexico during a critical time in the bilateral relationship. And I mean, for the first time in decades, we're seeing U.S. policymakers bundle together issues like tariffs, migration enforcement, and security cooperation in our negotiations with Mexico. Do you think this integrated approach strengthens the bilateral relationship, or does it risk creating?
And let me, just a little bit of background. I think I understand this. The premise of the question was that historically, when we talked about issues like trade, security, and immigration, everybody sort of stayed in their own lane. Trade people would be talking with trade people, and they would be sort of cross-trading. Nominated in March of 2002. While we had done some trade things with Mexico very effectively, we really hadn't done but immigration as related to the movements of people and bundle of issues somewhat related. There was just an urgency. So I was not a career person. I was a political appointee to the office. So I didn't have that long sort of historic compartmentalized that only talked about trade here, security here, immigration there. So it was more and I think it worked for us. While we had, I think, a good trade relationship with Mexico, the matter was that on something as basic as intelligence, which I know many students here study intelligence, money, if you will, or the capacity for the exchange of intelligence that would be action. By that, I mean, we had gotten very comfortable with Mexico exchanging information. We had gotten to this point where there was intelligence within certain kind of vetted units. But the only kind of intelligence that was going to be really relevant to the anti-terrorism efforts was going to be intelligence exchanged in real time. And it was building a very high level of trust. Intelligence was important. While it wasn't necessarily immigration, the ability to track I'm afraid you had all the issues related to moving time, having sufficient capacity for inspections at borders and others so that nothing was slipping through. So we were always talking about those issues somehow related to each other. I don't remember a time before that. I think the question has excessive leverage to get things unrelated to trade. And we can go into that conversation, the impact that has and how it's perceived in Mexico. But the truth is, this administration has not those issues were never talked. For transparent and transactional, and for they don't see that it really is, there's any reciprocity related to what's given out. They're simply threatening with a tariff. So I think probably the context of the accident, I always saw them somewhat related because Mexico is a bit of an ally in the sense that we are so integrated with Mexico by virtue of that border and the faith that they just seem to be.
Absolutely, but just to follow up on that question then, I mean, there's clearly something different that's occurred. Certain concessions from the Mexican government and, and nothing super deep or long, but how has, from your observation, has this weakened the relationship, weakened the ties, weakened sort of the spirit of the relationship, or this is something that that's just that they went different?
That's a good question, and I will tell you, it's a hard one for me to answer because I think the United States was had the strong hand in most of the issues. At the same time, I think they felt that there was a certain civility is too strong a word, but less of a transactional, less of that parent over legacy exercise. But with that said, I think that if you look for the North America, there is also, for instance, President Scheinbaum has done a very good job in terms of positioning the my comparisons with the way this administration has dealt with first we go initially Connie was getting a little bit better sort of treatment than now Connie with the administration. Scheinbaum, the president of Mexico, kind of carved out sort of a privileged position. Threatened tariffs, 5% on that. Other than that, which is already covered by USF tariffs, to the extent that tariffs. What we see and what businesses were occasionally react last was be careful about reacting. There's going to be headline volatility, but strip away the headline for a moment and do the analysis of it. That it creates uncertainty, which is detrimental to longer term investment without a doubt. But that Mexicans have volume, if you will. I think they've done that pretty well. And they've also gotten much more sophisticated about reading between the lines of U.S. politics. When I was down there in 2002, I really wanted to do this with I remember when too often, but in 2002, if car on a tires in a compact trailer, there's something that would be perceived very big. It would be above the fold for you young people. There used to be things called anything. It would be something that would be above the fold. They're much better about realizing that that's part of political story. I think it managed this period very well. I'm not concerned about the trade relationship, but I think there's some challenge. The fact that for growing domestic.
Before we go on to the next question, I have like a couple of questions, but on the programs, there are codes and we want to hear from you. So shortly, we're going to open it up for ambassador Bartra. So scan the code and please send us some questions and debate just a couple minutes. But I want to ask security next, because over the past year, Washington has increased pressure on Mexico to take decisive action against the drug cartels. The proposals that could involve some form of U.S. military presence in Mexican territory, or at least allegedly a U.S. headline volatility, as we said. But these demands have been paired with key words from the White House that the status quo, what Mexico has been doing, is no longer acceptable. And for some, it seems that the question isn't whether the United States pressure will intensify, but how far it can go, whether Mexico is ready for the that. Us. So how do you see the tide on security issues evolving in the next 6 months? Is it going to be more of the same, or do you anticipate, because Mexico is having some challenges with security, and it is going to affect its relationship with the United States, but I wonder, how you see this situation evolving in the coming 6 years, maybe?
Well, I think actually, the current administration has done a much better job than the predecessor. I think in many ways, probably the time bomb has benefited from not being able to go again and from not being able to go at places in the United States. And she played that piece of this very well. The predecessor on security was something called abrazo no balazo. Science. And the other thing, he also failed, I think, to take advantage of the United States' desire to integrate to Mexico, particularly after his predecessor shut the door on a lot of cooperation. During that period, was the initiative in which place might have been to security what NAFTA had trade. Naive, because what was set up in Merida, some counter-narcotic capacity. I mean, we did so many things on counterterrorism that would have never happened but for 9/11. And one of the things that made clear is that countries don't do things really because they're planned. Trying to work with. They did that because the strike on the wall, strike on our time. They did things around tourism because we wanted to know what was coming in and out, but they also wanted it's the fact that but they didn't think it was never the kind of during the pandemic, and so most of them put it that much more going on than the general public. Really intelligent stuff. I'm amazed at like what's going on before. So I think this administration is good on it's early. Yeah, you can do so much good. You're willing to do. This administration has always put high values. But on this, I think that it's absolutely.
Security, and related on that topic, I want to talk a little bit about that, if we talk about it directly, and how the spirit of what happened in Venezuela influenced the U.S. actions towards Mexico, and specifically following the recent U.S. military operation in Venezuela, which publicly, I think, Mexico moved on streets in the span of a week, insisting that cartels is in Mexico and something's going to have to be done. And so, in your opinion, did the U.S. intervention in Venezuela do anything specific? Whether
Pick up conversations with people in Mexico saying, well, I guess this administration quite conceivably could entertain some sort of action. That possibility high. And for many reasons. One, it wouldn't very much be a red line for the Mexican government. I think at that point, all cooperation would likely cease. Second, I don't think it would be particularly effective because you would not be trying to take out a government targeting narcotics cartel heads within the country, which already have a pretty effective set of strategies for targeting kingpins. The problem in Mexico is not so much kingpins. There's obviously the governmental challenges about it. Well, I compared a little bit more to a bar. And you can't attack a bar with a circle fraction. Yeah. So I think that's a pretty realistic flow. The effectiveness could be, but it would be very much like front line. Yeah, it wouldn't make any sense at all. And the only possibility would be how we can look. But it's not the big or Mexico. Or perhaps a year, 2, 3 ago. So, and other countries like America should have for years. Out there before the United States. Yeah, there's no doubt.
nice to see. But
But I think it's, that's like, they're, they see, they're lacking the EPA for, those issues, sharing ideas and getting done under the best way. It's driven by now, with that. And and
Scheinbaum has intensified efforts against major cartels, including operations specifically targeting fentanyl production. How might, I mean, maybe I will tease out the question a bit more about how might these strategies reshape cooperation on organized crime moving forward? You know, are you optimistic that this is going to continue, this level of cooperation is going to continue? Yeah, I want to talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, look, I think we'll see the level of cooperation continue as long as we, and I say we now, U.S., continue to foster a generally positive overall climate.
Sure.
You know, a lot of the cooperation, the perception in the United States was that it was a byproduct solely of the threat. Perhaps it happened more quickly with a bit more urgency because of the threat. But within Mexico, they were very concerned about security and the role of cartel and these sorts of things. And so many times in the United States, or even amongst the political commentariat, actions that Claudia Sheinbaum has taken to address security or human trafficking are perceived as concessions to this administration in the U.S., when in effect they are things that her own public and populace wants to see done.
Sure.
It would be hard to suggest that a woman in the presidency of Mexico enjoys 60 plus popularity ratings based on the fact that she is perceived as giving in to the United States president. So you have to say that a lot of that is because there's an alignment on these sorts of things that are important. So I think the cooperation continues because it's something that President Sheinbaum recognizes that her country wants. I think it's important that we recognize that that's also a byproduct of let's work with Mexico on these trade issues.
Mm-hmm.
Let's work with Mexico on these investment issues. Let's work with Mexico on things so that there continues to be that alignment. We benefit enormously from a safe, secure, and prosperous Mexico. Can you imagine what it would be like to have a Venezuela on our border? We benefit enormously. So I think we have to continue to recognize that. And so I think that the cooperation will continue as long as we work at managing the environment. The bigger challenge maybe for President Sheinbaum is that the Morena party, which is her party, is such a dominant party in the country. And it's a dominant party that she does not have nearly the level of control of that her predecessor. So as her party starts to splinter, as she goes into their own interim elections in Mexico, and the party starts to splinter, I think your challenge is going to be more domestic, keeping her own together. And as a practical matter, there is very little opposition party. So it's not as though there's a natural sort of coalition out there waiting for her to graft onto the support that she has on Morena. If she can't keep her Morena party together, it's going to be very hard to push a domestic agenda. And then I think some of the cooperation may start to break down a little bit. So it can happen by virtue of domestic weakness, if that comes into play
Sure.
during the interim, or if we do something to undermine the overall sense that the environment is positive. And look, going into USMCA, as recently as a week or so ago, 2 weeks ago, the administration in Washington was saying, I don't even know we need an agreement. Well, that's not helpful. That's not unlike the typical opening gambit in terms of their negotiation postures, but it's not helpful. And then more recently, I think she very shrewdly stepped away from continuing to want to send oil to Cuba and said, we're not going to do that. We're going to maybe some humanitarian aid. So there's a lot of things coming into play when you overlay the sunset of USMCA for July, which is the trade agreement, with the interim elections of November, with everything else that's going on in the world.
Absolutely, but you don't see, I mean, because this was what this question came from when we talked a little bit about it earlier, that there is any sort of oncoming red line from the perspective of President Sheinbaum, and that she's going to be under too much pressure from the United States to address security issues, to address issues of corruption, and that put her in conflict with her own party. I mean, do you think there's going to be a state?
I don't.
She'll say, kind of say uncle and say that, basically I can't do this because this is ruining my own domestic, sort of support and consistency.
I don't think she's there or anywhere near that yet. Okay. I think Mexican people continue to want to see on these large 20, 25, 30 individual extraditions at the time. That was unheard of just a handful of years ago. And I think Mexican people say, great, get them out of the country. The cooperation on the interdictions, I think the Mexican people are saying, great, let's go after these. It gets a little tougher for her to go after some political corruption because much of that may be within her own party. Right. Much of that may be associated with her predecessor. And so I don't think there's any lines there that she hasn't been able to manage well. And they are perceived somewhat in response to the U.S., but I think they're things that align well with Mexico. The red lines would be a military intervention in Mexico, a U.S. military, that would be a bright red line. That would be a line that would be just, there'd be a cleavage within her party. I don't think she could withstand it. That's the kind of thing. And that's why I don't think this administration in the U.S. would do that.
Would do that. Okay. Well, I want to ask one more question, especially as we're undergoing.
I would try a lightning round. Try asking me yes or no questions. I won't answer them, but try.
I'll try. That'll be round 2. But the renewing of the USMCA, which is occurring as we speak, and this is the United States, Mexico, and Canada agreement, preparing for a review this year. What do you see as the most significant obstacles? I mean, this is what everyone is sort of watching, especially amidst tariff issues. And I mean, is this going to reshape the relationship in some way, or are you optimistic that the process is going to go smoothly? Is it going to be done by July as we hope?
Wait, slow down. Am I optimistic? Yes. Am I optimistic the process will go smoothly? No. Will it be done by July? Unlikely.
That was my version of a lightning round.
Yeah. Okay. I will say this, that the way I've characterized it, and a couple of people have heard me say this today, we've had takeoff. The plane has taken off. I assure you the plane will land. It's going to be a heck of a ride in between. And that's just the nature of these things, particularly with this administration. I don't know that we can land it by July. And that's, kind of the first date out there. And if we don't land it by July, I think it may kick over to the new year beyond the November elections. I think it would be in the administration's best interest to do a couple of things by July. One is get USMCA done with both Mexico and Canada and do it as a review so it doesn't have to go to Congress, because if it has to go to Congress, it gets really tough. They don't have trade promotion authority. It won't get done. Get that thing to ground, July, review, boom. The other thing I think the administration would be wise to do is do around, let's say, the Dreamers Act, or do something around H-2B visas, do something around. Look, our labor supply is tighter and tighter and tighter. And so I think those two things would actually serve this administration very well politically. And going into November, they might be. If they don't get it, those sorts of things by July, I think you kick it over to the new year. And all it does is leave in the kind of uncertainty that is not good for investors. I mean, you'll see, and I say I am optimistic because even if you look at USMCA as the default that we've got to get, I firmly believe if you look at what's going on in the world today, the so-called fracturing, if you saw the Carney speech at Davos, the realignment of our retreat almost from leadership on trade, whether it be with the EU or the Pacific, sorts of things, we're going to need a foundation. Our platform has got to be North America. We will get through this period as the pendulum swings, I think, back to a little more sort of thoughtfulness on trade. And we'll need this platform to then sort of start thinking about what's our relationship going to be in the Pacific with the EU, with others, because that's really longer term how we're going to deal with. We're not going to decouple from China.
Sure.
We're going to sort of try to manage the confrontation down. And how we do that, I think, is going to have to be from a base of strength in North America. And I think I want to believe that the leadership in the three countries recognizes that. Again, it'll be default. It won't come easy and it won't come quick. But I think at some point they'll realize there was wisdom in looking at North America as a region. There is wisdom in having a platform like USMCA. There is wisdom in having a security perimeter that is larger than just one country.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to open it up to audience questions now. We have a lot of questions coming in, and two different members of our audience wanted to know what it was like to work across two Vicente Fox and Felipe Calderon administrations. One question characterized it as quite a tumultuous period in Mexico's history. You may or may not agree with, but I mean, was there a difference, a measurable difference, working with each of those presidents? And I mean, could you situate your time as ambassador, like working in that period, that unique period of time when the National Action Party was in the presidential palace?
Yeah, I really enjoyed. Vicente Fox was a large sort of personality, large charismatic individual. He had won the presidency after 80 years of PRI rule. He's a big, strapping fellow. He liked the big stage. Didn't like details much. And so he was a little harder to engage. He really was. And curiously, he was much more of a nationalist than I think people appreciate, in that he didn't like to engage. He really didn't. He didn't have nearly he had an affinity for all things U.S. He'd gone to school here. I think he'd spent some time in Ohio, these sorts of things. He'd worked for Coca-Cola. He was marketing guy at Coca-Cola. But the hard decisions sometimes, I think, were tougher for him. So it was hard to engage with him on security stuff outside of the absolute got-to-dos. And I must say, on all the counterterrorism stuff, he was very good. Felipe Calderon, on the other hand, was, we might say, much less charismatic, but really into the nitty-gritty of the details of Mérida and getting it done. I'll tell a quick story. In anticipation for his meeting with George W. Bush, President Bush, 43rd, he and I sat down for dinner, and he was asking all the right questions. What's he like? How do I talk to him? This, that, and the other. Mm-hmm. And I said, he's a Texan. Be direct, be honest, tell him what you're thinking, put it on the table with him. He says, good. He tried a couple of lines out on me. I said, great. When he pulled them out, I realized not only did he appreciate what I was trying to say, he had a sense of timing. At one of our meetings, and this I'm not sharing anything out of school that it's been written about. George W. Bush asked me, he says, what do you need? And Felipe Calderon says, if Jack Bauer's got it, I need it. I just thought, wow. At that point, I was worried that maybe your brother wasn't a big TV guy. He might not have, but he picked up on it immediately. And I just thought, this guy gets it. And he was direct. And as they were leaving, President Bush says, we're going to get it done. And then President Calderon says, I need you. We need to partner on this. And Bush says, if you're in, I'm in. And Carlos says, I'm in. And it was just, there was never that kind of click. And you may think these are nice sort of anecdotes, but they really spoke to the level of directness and the level of commitment that was necessary to get our Congress and his leadership to get behind something like Merida and to build on the momentum that was there in the wake of the counterterrorism stuff. Very different men. But I really, I have a tremendous amount of respect for what Vicente Fox did politically, but turning out the PRI after 80 years. But in the day-to-day of trying to get things done, of dealing with the narcotics and having that relationship work in the nitty-gritty, I really thought the world of President Calderon.
One issue that we really haven't dug into too much tonight is that of water and energy issues. And I mean, this is something that kind of perennially comes up, but some would argue doesn't receive as much coverage or attention as issues like immigration and security and such. And I'm wondering, and one of our members of our audience mentioned the just Colorado River issues and water scarcity in the state of Baja California. This is the state near our state of California. And so I wonder what areas, if you can identify areas that you think are ripe for cooperation in water and energy issues, especially since it's such a domestic issue in many parts of Mexico.
Yeah, well, I mean, they're all ripe for cooperation. I think if you look at energy, for example, Mexico did some energy reform a handful of years ago, more than a handful, I guess it was in the Peña Nieto administration. And then basically for every 2 steps forward, they took a step and a half backwards. The energy investment in Mexico is somewhat at a standstill. This new administration has started, I think, if nothing else, to appreciate and recognize the need to expand investment in Mexico, or this growth that they're seeing in manufacturing is going to come to a quick halt. I mean, you can't power it unless you can power it. In Texas, we're somewhat the beneficiaries of that. We're, what is it, 4.5 or 5 billion cubic feet. I mean, we're exporting a tremendous amount of natural gas to Mexico. But if you look at northeastern Mexico, the same basins that are huge producers in the United States likely are part of northeastern Mexico, and they're simply not being produced. So there's a lot that could be done in terms of energy if they would just open it up to more investment. And I don't see a lot of movement there. I'm starting to see the kind of talk that you had in Mexico that was sort of the prelude to the first round of reform. Maybe they'll get there again. Maybe it'll be a year. I don't know. On water, same thing. There's not a lot of long-term thinking about water in Mexico. Last summer, for example, in Mexico City, they said 0 day was June 1st. And there was some real concern being expressed about, can you imagine the city of 20 some odd in the parts of the city are no longer getting water and social unrest, what kind of havoc that could wreak. And if you ask people what's the strategy, and I'm not exaggerating, they said the strategy is prayer. And about 2 weeks before 0 started to rain and it didn't stop. Now, there's a strong argument for prayer, but that's not really a policy. And too many times it seems, even along the river, I grew up in South Texas and we've had these challenges with Mexico over water forever, and they've seldom delivered. And more often than not, it rains. I mean, not all the time, but more often than not. And so that almost always buys you time. But unless you get water right around that whole stretch and in the central part, that's going to be a major issue. If you don't get energy right, that's going to be a major issue. I don't know how, for example, they've started to talk about database strategies. Well, if you can't power them, you don't have, all you've got is land. That's not a database strategy. And so there's a lot of areas that I think are ripe for cooperation. I have not seen the level of back and forth even between Texas and Mexico that you used to see. Texas, for the longest time, led really the nation on discussions around trade and immigration. I don't see us doing that as much. Now, Texas business, I think, gets it.
Yeah.
But I don't see Texas leadership doing it nearly to the extent that they once did. And in northeastern Mexico, I think there's a little bit of a pullback. So I think there are a lot of areas that are ripe for cooperation. But first and foremost, let's get that trade agreement back in place. Let's, I think in the United States, let's start to be realistic about the way we address some of our labor issues around immigration reform. In Mexico, if they take a couple of steps in the right direction on energy, the continued cooperation and security, let's get some of those basic kind of blocking and tackling things done before, and maybe on that we can start building a longer, more longer term strategies around some of these other big issues.
Yeah. Oh, one question came up about China, and you had lunch with a group of our graduate students.
Yeah, tough lunch.
Really tough.
Really? It was good. It was a good lunch. It was tough.
This afternoon, and somebody brought up China, and basically, what is I don't know what to call it, threat, but Chinese investment in Mexico has increased, engagement has increased, and I wonder how you see the Chinese relationship with Mexico in the coming years, and whether or not that poses any sort of legitimate threat to the United States.
I maybe I don't want to say naive. I mean, but I didn't see all that much Chinese activity in Mexico around manufacturing. Okay, I saw a lot of Chinese cars, and I could understand. I mean, it's a pretty good car at a great price, right? And so I could understand the appeal that it had, sort of retail. But I didn't see the same level of Chinese activity in Mexico that you said that you had, let's say, in Peru or in other parts of Latin America, where you saw them going in and sort of making investments and doing some big infrastructure things. I really didn't see that in Mexico. You saw some activity around industrial parks, maybe in northeastern Mexico. For a while, there was a lot of talk about maybe Mexico would be kind of the workaround for tariffs and this sort of thing and access into the U.S. market. You saw the Mexican government respond pretty quickly to putting tariffs in place so that wouldn't be possible. That was perceived as in response to the U.S.'s, maybe in part. But if you look at the last, I want to say, really, probably in the wake of, probably through the mid-90s forward, Mexico and China are not really complementary. They're kind of competitive in the sense that all those things that Mexico was doing around sort of the lower value or lower skill manufacturing, the textiles and some of the lesser skill type manufacturing, China came in and ate their lunch on that. Took all that and really hurt Mexico. And when Mexico did, their response to that was move kind of up the value chain. Mexico's manufacturing is actually pretty good. The automotives, light aeronautic, I mean, different things that are pretty good. That's what China's after now, because China's already captured all this. Now China wants what Mexico's doing now. So I don't think, keeping China out of Mexico is not necessarily solely U.S. interest. It's probably in Mexico's best interest to stay as hitched to the United States on these sorts of issues as possible. Not for us, for them. It's in their own best interest. And that's, to me, right. That's kind of why you see that China thing. Now, the twofer is that they're perceived to be doing it, and in Washington, they're perceived to be being accommodated. Well, that's a twofer for Mexico. But I think it's in Mexico's best interest to fully integrate with the United States and recognize that their strongest selling point, sure, they've got beautiful beaches, sure, they've got a lot of great food, but their strongest selling point is access to the United States, and that's something they don't ever really want to put at risk.
Right. So these might be kind of seemingly unrelated threats, but I mean, there's been a lot of media coverage in the last few weeks, as you know, domestic immigration enforcement issues. I mean, you can't really watch without looking to Minnesota.
That's actually a bigger issue in Mexico than you appreciate.
Well, that's exactly what you anticipated my question. So thank you so much.
Well,
how is it being spoken about in Mexico? Is there any sort of impact on the U.S.-Mexico border? I mean, how are people in Mexico seeing or talking about it?
They're talking about it the same way people in the United States are talking about it. Really, what you're seeing in Minneapolis, well, however you might feel about immigration and ICE and enforcement, you're not seeing something that most Americans are comfortable with. I want safe, secure borders. I want immigration law enforcement. I've seen Border Patrol do their job. And at the same time, what I'm seeing now, a lot of Americans are saying, wait, that doesn't seem quite right. And Mexicans are having the same reaction. Perhaps they're having it a bit more viscerally because in some respects they're saying, wait, that could have been fill in the blank, brother, sister, mother, whatever. Or that was so-and-so that had a work permit, or that was so-and-so that, if I remember correctly, actually was a citizen. You know, so it's echoing back in a way that that you talked about. You don't necessarily hear the government reacting to it, but I do hear people reacting to it on a sort of on a more what's going on here level. And really, again, I mean, regardless of how you feel about immigration generally, I think most people want that should be safe, secure, and they want to know who's in the country, and they want it with a certain I don't know. They want it done according to even for lack of better word, accepted enforcement protocols, and they're not seeing that.
Mm.
I think even the administration is realizing that they've gone too far and is sort of trying to sort of rein some of this in. And if you look at some of the reforms proposed, you know, they don't seem outrageous.
Right. Well, we're nearing the end of our Q&A period, so if you
Let
have
me
any
show
last
these off.
questions, yeah.
That's a
Get
tribute.
photo,
Yeah.
photo up there.
I know he was a big fan of socks, and that's the best I could do. I couldn't find the ones that he had gifted us all those years ago.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this seems like a good conclusion question, but if you were advising the next ambassador to Mexico, you know, what would you tell them to stop doing, to start doing? You know, what should they prioritize?
You know, I think the current ambassador is really doing a very good job. I don't know Ambassador Johnson well, but he is working with a high level of discretion. He obviously knows the security issues. He clearly understands the intelligence issues. He has gained, I think, the respect and trust of his interlocutors,
Mhm.
and I think he's doing a very good job. I personally feel that I've benefited tremendously, and I may have been, in some respects, I think every ambassador since me has had a much tougher job. I had the benefit of a president that I knew well, and I felt a very comfortable alignment with. I had two secretaries of state that were responsive and always at the National Security Council. Tom Shannon was amazing. And so the Mexico desk, Roberta Jacobson, who was later one of my successors.
Yeah.
It's like, for me, the stars all lined up in terms of the talent and commitment and started at the top. So in that sense, no matter how difficult the issues were, when you have that alignment from the White House to state to the intelligence down to your office, it works. Where you don't have that, it's a lot harder. So I guess part of my counsel would be, obviously, get smart on the issues, but appreciate not only your interlocutors, but you're the team that is within state. And Louis, I know it seems very much in vogue to talk about deep state, critical people. There's a lot of very good, very talented people in government who simply want to do right each and every day. Don't be dismissive of those people. They really are every bit as patriotic and as caring and wanting to do right as anybody you've ever met. Make them part of your team. I think that's what I would tell the next ambassador.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, thank you so much. I think that seems like a fitting note to end on.
All right.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much again, Ambassador Garza, for coming. Thank you to you all for joining us, and we wish you a good night, and we look forward to seeing you at our future events.